Hello everyone and welcome to the Rift. Today I want to talk about a tournament I hosted. That's right, every Saturday I host tournaments. If you want to play, there's a sign up link in the description. And if you want to learn how to use Tabletop Simulator, which is the simulator we use to play the game, I've got a video on my channel explaining how you can use it. Alright, another week, another tournament. Here's the overall breakdown of what people play this weekend. Lots of Victor, Kaisa, and Master Yi. These seem to be pretty popular decks, especially among newer players it seems. And that's not too surprising. These decks are pretty good, I'd say. We've also got a bunch of Ari, Set, and Yasuo. Set I still think is the best deck, even though he's not the most played. We'll get into why I think he's the best in a bit. Ari I think is pretty good, potentially top 5, but I don't really think so. I don't think she's that great, but she's still definitely good. Yasuo, I think, is just kind of a lost cause. I'll be honest, he hasn't really done anything in our past few tournaments, and I don't really expect him to do that much. Jinx is still underperforming mostly, but she's getting better. People are starting to figure out ways to play her better, and she actually got a top cut placement this time, the first in our tournaments, which is cool to see. Misfortune is still struggling. I still think she has potential to be really good, but she definitely has not been performing well, that's for sure. Volibear is still not doing great. I think he just struggles into too many of the top decks right now. Darius did really well in this tournament. I think he's a pretty good deck. Seems like he can be built a bunch of different ways. I still think the more aggro build is probably the best, as it utilizes your legend effect the most. And having a really strong early game, potentially one of the strongest early games of any deck in the game, is a really big strength to have right now. Lee Sin and Teemo are not doing that well. I still think they're alright decks, but they haven't been performing, and people haven't been playing them that much. Annie did alright at this tournament. She actually got a top cut placement, and Garen, Lux, and Leona I just don't think are decks that are really playable right now. For our top 8 placements, we've got 2 Darius, Kaisa, Jinx, Ari, Set, Victor, and Annie. I don't really think any of these decks are a surprise to me outside of Jinx. All of these decks I think can do pretty well in our current meta, at least at the beginning, when people really haven't figured that much out yet. Something new we have this week that is interesting is win rates for our decks. This is an overall cumulative win rate combining both this tournament and previous ones to see where decks are really standing right now in the metagame. This is the raw data here, and here it is organized into a more visually appealing list. Again, this is win rate, so win percentage of games that you're winning. Set being clearly the best deck, I don't think is that much of a surprise, and all the decks in A tier I think are pretty good as well. Teemo might not be this high up. Other than that, I don't think there's anything too high on this list, but there are quite a few decks that I think are too low, probably brought down by them having a higher play rate or not being played that much at all, so the data can be a bit skewed, either from a lot of newer players or inexperienced players playing these decks at a proportionally high rate, or just not many people playing them at all, so we don't have that much great data. Master Yi, Victor, Ari, Annie, and Misfortune I think are a lot better than they are represented on this list. I still think Victor is one of the best decks. Master Yi is probably high up there as well. Ari and Annie and Misfortune are also really good picks in this format, I think. Annie and Misfortune really haven't been played that much, so there's really not that much data. And Victor and Master Yi have the opposite problem, where they are some of the most played decks by a lot of new players as well, so I think their win rate is brought down a bit by that. If I had to guess where decks actually fall on a tier list, this is about where I'd put them for right now. I think anything pretty much in A tier or in B tier can do really well right now, at least while we don't have that much real knowledge about the format and we're still all kind of figuring stuff out and experimenting. As time goes on, probably a few of these decks in B tier are going to go lower down on the tier list as we figure out that they're not as good as we thought, and I think anything in C or D tier is pretty much a lost cause at this point, unless something crazy happens, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Getting into our deck list, this is the winner, first place. It's Kaisa by Kuvi. I think this is a pretty standard aggro Kaisa list, which is how people have been playing the deck, more with an aggro tempo-ish kind of gameplay style as opposed to just a control deck. People have been cutting Acathian Reigns and Singularities in favor of more cards that can act immediately, like accelerate units list. I think this list is pretty good. I really like the cleave. I think I'd be playing 3 copies of that and just cutting things like Orb of Regret and Shakedown. I don't think those cards are actually very impactful. I'd much rather play more cleaves, more Yordles, maybe even a 3rd copy of Thousand-Tailed Watcher. That card is really good, and potentially maybe some Legion rear guards as well. I like that card a lot too. I think having a 2-drop consistently on turn 1 is really nice, and this list is only really running 6 of those, which isn't that consistent. I think running 8 is probably the way to go for right now. The sideboard makes sense. Retreat is really good in the mirror. Vi is really good against ramp decks and decks that want to play Dazzling. I think Thermo Beam probably is the way to go. I think I'd rather just play more copies of Vi and Acathian Rain over it. But yeah, definitely very good list. Next is Jinx, which is kind of like a hybrid build between aggro and control combo Jinx that we've seen. There are running cards like Falling Star and Immortal Phoenix, which are usually seen in the more controlling builds of the deck, but mostly it's just an aggro Jinx list, which I think is probably the way to go. I really like aggro Jinx into this format. I think she's decent into Victor and has an alright matchup into most other things, but Jinx definitely hasn't been doing that well in tournaments so far. Next, we've got Ahri, which seems like a pretty standard mid-range list to me. You've just got cheap units, your green staples, and good blue and green cards in here. Charm, On Guard, Defy, Discipline, all 3 ofs I think makes perfect sense. Just playing a bunch of cheap units and some high impact top end like Blitzcrank and Riptide Rex. Seems like a decent list to me. This is a deck that's kind of just meant to play good, honest Riftbound, and I'm not surprised that it's doing well. Next we have Set, which I think is a pretty standard looking list. This is almost exactly how I build mine. The Sabotage in the main I still think is more of a sideboard card, but I can see it working out. And just a bunch of cheap units and some things like Call to Glory and Challenge to back up your units. Yeah, it seems like a pretty good list. Just 3 copies of all the good cards that you want to see. Next is Victor, which is more of a control-y mid-range build of Victor. I think this list is probably fine, but I prefer the more go-wide aggro build of Victor. I think Victor just synergizes better being built that way. This list to me kind of just seems like it's trying to be Ahri, but Ahri just does this kind of control-y mid-range game plan better than this list does, I would think. You have cards like Blitzcrank and Charm, which I think are just better than the yellow options like Vengeance. Vengeance I don't think is really that great of a card right now. People are playing a lot of cheap units and units that get value immediately, so I don't really like Vengeance in this current format. I think if you're trying to just play a mid-rangey deck that just plays normal Riftbound, I think you're probably just going to pick Ahri instead of this. I think Victor is probably just going to want to play a go-wide build instead. Cards like Siphon Power and Grand Stratagem are just so insane. They're some of the best cards that Victor has access to, and I really think you want to be playing that stuff. This is definitely not a bad deck by any means. I just think if you're going to try and build this, you probably should just play Ahri instead. Next, we've got an interesting list. This is a Control Darius list, which is definitely interesting. It's playing like 16 cards in the main deck that function as removal spells, even more if you count Darius and Kaisa as being that. You're playing 22 cards that are essentially removal, which is a lot. Again, a list that I don't think is bad by any means, but I think Darius is probably just better built as an aggro deck. You really want to be utilizing your Legends effect, and I don't really think this list does that well. Just going wide and putting down a ton of might super early in the game seems like an extremely strong play pattern in the current meta, and really isn't getting punished by that much. Go wide in general really can't be punished by that much in the game right now. People have been cutting the cards that punish that from most of their decks, like Acathian Rain and Singularity. Like Acathian Rain, Kaisa isn't even main decking that anymore. I think a lot of the removal in this format is really bad at dealing with tokens. So if I'm playing a deck like Darius or Victor, as I mentioned before, I just want to spam the board with as many tokens as I possibly can. I think that's an extremely strong gameplay pattern right now. Forces your opponent to spend real cards on killing tokens, which are free essentially. Your opponent really doesn't want to be doing that. Yeah, I just value tokens really highly and going wide really highly in general in this format. Again, I think if you're going to try and build like a control-y mid-range deck or a control-y aggro deck, you're probably better off just picking either Kaisa or Atari to accomplish that goal. I don't really think Darius adds anything to that gameplay style that those other decks do. I think those other decks just lay that way a bit better than Darius does, but definitely not a bad deck. It's definitely an interesting take. Next, we have another Darius list. This is a deck that is kind of all over the place. It's playing stuff that wants to go wide. It's playing combo pieces like Hook, and it's playing control tools like Vayne. So I don't really think this deck synergizes that well. I don't think it's a bad list, but I just don't think it has a game plan in mind. I think you've got to pick something and stick with it. Like, do you want to play go wide aggro, or do you want to play more a controlling game? I think you've got to pick with one of those and stick with it. To me, the Vayne just doesn't really fit in this deck, and the grand stratagems aren't really being utilized that much. I think they're a lot better in Victor. You really don't have that much token generation in this list. You've got Faithful Manufacturer and Vanguard Captain, and that's it. And the baited Hook, I really think you have to build a deck around that card to make it effective, and that doesn't seem like what this deck is doing. Next, our 8th place deck, we've got Annie. First time she's shown up at a top cut spot, and this deck seems pretty good, I think. It's a very aggressive, very fast deck with cards like Flash and Ride the Wind. Ride the Wind is a crazy card. They're playing Fight or Flight as well, so basically playing 8 cards for extra movement, which is a lot. They're playing a ton of 1 and 2 drop spells to utilize with their Legends effect to have 2 free energy every turn, which I think is really good synergy. I really like the shakedowns in this deck because it's free, and you're probably going to need some card draw. If you're playing a bunch of cheap cards, you might just run out of stuff to play. Cleave and Gus seem really good. They're really cheap interaction, and all the Accelerate units like Kaisa and Darius seem really good as well. I think this deck is honestly extremely fast and pretty scary in certain matchups. They can kind of just win really fast out of nowhere with a list like this, and that is quite strong, I would say. I think where this deck could run into issues is just having such a low unit count. If your units start getting killed back to back, you could run into trouble just not having enough units left to really play the game meaningfully. But other than that, yeah, this deck seems pretty good. It definitely synergizes well, I would say. All the cards in here make sense. Alright, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date, and I've got a lot of neat videos planned, so make sure you don't miss them in the future. Alright, that's all I have to say today. Take care.